There are moments in a marriage that feel like *TS quiet, simple scenes that only later reveal themselves as turning points. For me, it was a rainy Thursday in October. Nothing special about the date. Just a cold evening, the kind where you light a candle not for ambience but because the dimness matches your mood. Avery came home late that night. Said she'd gone to a casual high school reunion downtown, something thrown together last minute by a friend she hadn't seen since graduation. I remember the way she walked in, coat damp, hair pinned up sloppily like she'd fixed it in a car mirror. She kissed my cheek absent-mindedly, shrugged off her coat, and went straight for the shower. That wasn't unusual. Avery wasn't one for long debriefs after nights out. But something about the way she dropped her overnight bag carelessly, almost strategically, caught my attention. She set it right in the center of the dining table. The same table we ate our first dinner on after moving in. The same table where we used to leave each other notes. It's funny what the brain does with those kinds of memories. She didn't say much, just mumbled something about the food being pretty good for buffet style and how weird it was to see so many people with kids now. I half listened, nodding from the kitchen where I was rinsing out mugs. Something about her voice felt distant. Not cold, just edited. Filtered through the kind of tone you use when you're trying not to say too much. I figured I'd clear the table while she was in the shower. Her bag was in the way, so I reached to move it. The zipper was slightly open, not enough to spill, but enough to reveal the edge of something dark and silky folded near the top. I hesitated, feeling like I was about to cross a line I didn't fully understand. Then I opened it. And there it was. A men's tie. Deep navy with diagonal Berg asterisk and Y stripes, folded precisely like a sales associate might do at a department store. It didn't belong to me. I don't wear ties like that. Haven't in years. Even when I used to, I never folded them that neatly, certainly not with care. I picked it up. That's when I smelled it. Cologne. Bold and expensive. Not subtle, not something you forget easily. It hit my nose like an echo, sharp, with that synthetic warmth high-end scents seemed to carry. Nothing I recognized. Nothing I owned. I stood there longer than I care to admit, just holding it like the weight of it might give me some sort of answer. It didn't. It just felt heavier the longer I stood there, waiting for something in my brain to click and say, it's nothing. But that click never came. The shower stopped. I heard the curtain slide back. Footsteps across the tile. I zipped the bag and placed it back on the table as quietly as I could. My hands felt like they didn't belong to me. She walked into the room in her robe, toweling off her hair, and paused when she saw me. "What's up?" she asked casually. I picked up the tie again and turned it slightly, letting the lamplight hit the fabric. "This yours?" I asked, and I meant it to sound light, but my voice came out too flat. She looked at it for less than a second before her expression barely shifted. "Oh," she said, brushing her hair back. "That must be Matt's. He left it at the bar. We were all laughing about it. He got too drunk, and I offered to drop it off next time I see him. It's probably been in my bag all night. I forgot." Her voice didn't crack. Her eyes didn't twitch. There was no hesitation. Just the faintest shrug and a small, dismissive smile, like she was amused by the whole thing. Matt. Matt from high school, I assumed. The name didn't even ring a strong bell. I didn't press. I didn't need to. It wasn't what she said. It was what she didn't say. "No, oh my God, I forgot that was in there." "No, you probably wondered why that was in my stuff, huh?" "No, sorry, I should have told you." That probably looked weird. She didn't reassure me because she didn't act like I needed reassuring. And that chilled me more than the lie would have. There was something too polished about her calm. Too composed. Like she'd had time to prepare. Like this wasn't the first time she'd told a version of that story. I nodded, pretending to let it go. I cracked a half smile, said something like, "Makes sense," and she walked past me, humming as she opened the fridge and pulled out a bottle of water. Later that night, she was already asleep by the time I crawled into bed. I watched her breathe for a while, trying to feel something, anger, suspicion, even just the urge to shake her awake and ask her again, point blank, what that tie was doing in her bag. But I didn't. Because deep down I already knew the answer. It wasn't about the tie. It was about the way she didn't even flinch when I found it. It was about the fact that she didn't feel the need to lie any better. It was about the calm in her voice that left me feeling more alone than if she'd screamed in my face. Something had shifted. I didn't know what yet. But I knew that night was the first time I looked at my wife and saw a stranger. Once you notice the first crack, you start seeing the fault lines everywhere. In the days that followed the tie incident, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. I told myself she was telling the truth, that maybe I was overanalyzing something meaningless. But when you've been with someone long enough, you know the subtle shifts, like the way silence starts to fill the spaces where laughter used to be. Or how her eyes dart to the side a second too long when she answers a question that used to come easy. Avery's phone was the first thing I really noticed. She used to be casual about it. Left it lying around. Checked it openly. But now it was always screen down, clutched a little tighter in her hand. And if she wasn't holding it, it was in her purse, zipped. Once she got a text while we were watching a show together. She glanced down at it, then turned the screen away from me and pretended to yawn. Another time, I heard her phone buzz at 11:23 p.m. She didn't move right away, like she was hoping I hadn't noticed. Then she picked it up and walked into the hallway, speaking softly. When I asked who it was, she said it was just Tessa, her old college roommate, dealing with a breakup. Except Tessa lived in Arizona and Avery hadn't mentioned her in years. It was small things. Tiny inconsistencies. But they started stacking. She began going to the gym more. At first, it was a few times a week. Then it became almost every day. She said she needed to feel stronger again, like she was reclaiming her energy. I encouraged it. I wanted her to feel good. But the gym bag she carried looked brand new, and so did the clothes inside it, tags still attached on some. And not once did she invite me to go with her, even though we used to love jogging together on the weekends. One day, I spotted a receipt in the trash for a boutique lingerie store across town. Not her usual place. She hadn't mentioned buying anything new and nothing had shown up at home. When I casually asked her about it, she said they were running a clearance sale and she couldn't pass it up. "Let me see what you got," I said, half joking. She smiled and said, "You'll see it eventually," in a tone that didn't sound teasing. It sounded like a deflection. She never wore any of it for me. Then there were the dinners, our family dinners that had once been routine. Cancelled. Forgotten. Rescheduled again and again. She claimed she was exhausted from work, from workouts, from just being pulled in too many directions. Weekends became reset days where she'd sleep in, scroll her phone, disappear for errands that lasted hours. And she started using that word more, reset. As in, I just need to reset my life, or I think I'm going through a reset period. It was vague, but it kept coming up in conversation. Like she was narrating a transition I hadn't signed up for. I remember once, maybe a week after the tie, she came home with a scratch on her collarbone. Long, thin, and pink. She winced when she brushed against it getting undressed. I asked her about it, and she laughed it off, said she leaned too close to the pull-down bar at the gym. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But it wasn't the kind of marked gym equipment leaves. Still, I said nothing. I smiled. Nodded. Pretended I believed it. I started watching her closer, though. Listening. Noticing how she had new phrases she never used before. It is what it is. You only live once. Phrases that don't really say anything but always seem to end a conversation instead of starting one. Our in asterisk Macy shifted too. Not in any dramatic way, no yelling or slammed doors, but in the quiet erosion of closeness. She used to reach for my hand in bed. Now she curled up with her back to me. I used to brush her hair from her eyes when she read beside me. Now she didn't read in bed anymore. The hardest part wasn't the suspicion. It was the waiting. Waiting for confirmation. Waiting to know if the person I loved had already left and just hadn't told me yet. So I tested small things. I asked if she wanted to take a weekend trip like we used to, just the two of us, back to the little coastal inn we visited on our 3rd anniversary. She smiled politely and said it's not really the right time. Maybe later. Later never came. She was distant but polite. Smiling but absent. Present but never really here. Sometimes I told myself this was just a phase. That maybe she really was just tired or overwhelmed. That maybe I'd slipped somehow and this was her way of coping. I even started going to the gym again, hoping we'd run into each other there. I never saw her once. Then one night I asked her directly, "Is everything okay between us?" She looked up from her phone, blinked once, and said, "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" I didn't press. Because I already knew the answer. It wasn't one moment that broke me. It was the steady drip of doubt turned into a downpour of reality I could no longer hide from. I found it on a Sunday morning. Avery was out, said she was meeting a friend for brunch. I stayed home, nursing a headache from a night spent tossing in bed beside someone who felt more like a stranger with each passing day. I tried reading, cleaning, anything to distract myself. That's when I remembered the old kitchen tablet. We used to use it for recipes and grocery lists. I hadn't touched it in months. It was buried under a stack of cookbooks. I powered it on, mostly out of boredom. It took a few tries, but the screen eventually flickered to life. What I didn't expect was the flood of notifications, dozens of unread messages, all tied to accounts Avery must have used and never logged out of. Her email. A messaging app one didn't recognize. Calendar reminders for appointments I hadn't heard about. I don't know what made me do it. Call it instinct. Call it desperation. I opened the app first. The icon was a minimalist speech bubble like any other. What I saw changed everything. There were conversations threads filled with texts between Avery and a contact listed simply as J. Long, winding exchanges with timestamps that made my stomach drop. Late at night. Early morning. During work hours. Every moment that I had once thought she was occupied elsewhere. Last night was perfect. I can still smell you on me. I hate sleeping alone after you leave. Can't wait for next weekend. Same hotel? My mouth went dry. I read and reread the messages, hoping I'd misunderstood. That it was a joke. That I was hallucinating. But there was no room for interpretation. No ambiguity. This was real. Photos were mixed in. Blurry mirror *TS of hotel rooms I didn't recognize. One of her in a dress I never saw her wear at home. Another, one that hit harder than the rest, was of a man wearing a gray button-down shirt. The same shirt I remembered seeing in our donation pile 6 months ago, the one she said didn't fit me right anymore. I kept scrolling, numb, detached from my own body. Hotel confirmations. Reservation emails for restaurants, places Avery and I used to go for special occasions. There were entries in her calendar marked yoga or dinner with Emma that lined up perfectly with the timestamps in these messages. It wasn't just cheating. It was strategy. Carefully plotted, cleanly executed deception. She didn't stumble into something. She walked into it again and again while lying to my face each time. I didn't know how long I sat there. The coffee pot beeped behind me, long gone cold. A car door shut outside. For a brief moment, I thought she'd come home and find me frozen in that kitchen, the tablet in my lap, all the evidence of our unraveling laid bare. But she didn't. Not yet. I stood up and walked to the hallway mirror, staring at myself. There was no scene. No shouting. No dramatic confrontation. Just a dull, heavy silence filling every space in the house, pressing into my chest like a weight. I had my proof. What do you do with a truth like that? There's no unseeing it. No unreading those words. No pretending you still believe the excuses. For months, I'd questioned myself. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was the one pulling away. But I wasn't crazy. I was right. She had let another man into the parts of her life she once reserved only for me. She hadn't just broken vows, she'd rewritten entire chunks of our history, repurposed the landmarks of our marriage into background noise for someone else. That hit me hardest. The places. The routines. The little things. Our anniversary restaurant, now a rendezvous point. The hotel we'd stayed at during our engagement trip, now her hideaway. The songs we used to play on road trips, now in a playlist labeled Jay's Picks. She didn't just have an affair. She rewrote us. I couldn't confront her right away. My heart pounded, my hands trembled. I needed time. Space. A plan. So I copied everything. *TS. Downloads. I saved the photos, the messages, the emails. I knew I'd need them, not just for divorce if it came to that, but for myself. To remember I wasn't imagining this. When she came home that afternoon, she was smiling. You won't believe what happened to Emma's car. I looked at her and nodded. Pretended to listen. Said something noncommittal about bad luck and insurance. She went on, reciting a story she probably practiced on the drive home, never noticing the shift in my eyes. The absence of warmth. For the first time since we'd met, I felt absolutely nothing when she touched my arm. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how we'd gotten here. Not just how she could betray me, but how I'd let it happen right under my nose. That night, I decided. I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't beg. I would leave. Not for revenge. Not to make a point. But because I had finally seen the truth. And I couldn't live with a lie anymore. Leaving wasn't a grand gesture. No slammed doors. No packed suitcases in a rush of fury. It was quiet, so quiet it almost felt like surrender. I didn't even take much. A few changes of clothes. My notebook. My shaving kit. I left my wedding ring on the nightstand like it belonged to someone else. I drove 3 hours to the lake house we used to visit every summer. It wasn't fancy. Just a weathered 2-bedroom cottage we'd inherited from my aunt. Tucked between pine trees and the gray-blue hush of still water. It was the only place I could think of that might hold some piece of peace for me. When I pulled into the gravel driveway, the wind had picked up. The flag on the dock flapped softly, and fallen leaves scattered across the porch like forgotten thoughts. Inside, everything smelled like dust and pine cleaner. I didn't bother unpacking. I dropped my bag in the corner, sat down on the sagging couch, and stared at the fireplace. There were ashes from our last visit still inside, 2 summers ago. That was the last time we'd been here together. I remember her laughing, barefoot, with a glass of wine in one hand and her hair twisted up in a clip. That was before she started talking about needing to reset. I didn't light the fire. I just sat there. I spent the first 2 days barely speaking. Not out loud. Not to anyone. My phone stayed off. I ignored the buzz of texts and calls. I wasn't ready to explain. Not to friends, not to family, not even to myself. Instead, I wrote pages and pages in a spiral-bound notebook. Not poetry. Not even coherent stories. Just fragments, sentences, thoughts, images. Her name. The smell of that cologne on the tie. The echo of her voice when she said, "It's not a big deal." The way she'd started locking her phone. The way she didn't cry when I found the truth. I wrote until my hand cramped. I wrote until I hated my own handwriting. There's a kind of silence you only find in places far from everything. Not the silence of avoidance, but the deep, reflective kind that holds you hostage with your own thoughts. That was the worst part. I couldn't blame her completely. I had to sit with all the moments I missed, all the times I didn't ask the hard questions. All the warning signs I had chosen to file under normal relationship fatigue. Was it my fault she cheated? No. But was I complicit in the slow erosion of what we had? Maybe. On the 3rd day, I found her coffee mug. An old white ceramic thing with a chip in the handle and a faded print that read, "Be gentle with yourself." It was still on the porch from last time, turned upside down, rain-washed and forgotten. I turned it over and stared at it for a long time, wondering when she stopped believing that, or if she ever had. I began going on long walks around the lake. Sometimes I saw other couples, older ones walking slowly, sharing a thermos. It used to give me hope. Now, it felt like watching a movie in a language I no longer understood. Nights were the hardest. The bed in the back room still smelled faintly of the lavender detergent she used. I stripped the sheets, slept in a sleeping bag on the floor instead. Felt more honest that way. On the 5th day, I opened the folder on my laptop and looked through the evidence again. The **TS, the emails, the calendar entries. I didn't need to, but I did. I stared at her messages, trying to match the words with the woman I married. Trying to find some thread that made it make sense. Couldn't. It was like staring into a stranger's diary. There was one message I kept returning to. A photo she sent him of her standing at our front door, smiling. The caption read, "He's at work. Thought of you when I wore this today." That was our welcome mat. The one we picked out together. That was the porch where she once cried and said she wanted a family someday. That was the smile she used to give me. Now it belonged to someone else. That was the moment the collapse happened. Not when I found the messages. Not when I left. But sitting on that old couch, staring at a picture that proved she'd brought him into our home, into the space we built. I felt something inside me tear in two. It wasn't just betrayal. It was erasure. She hadn't just stepped out of our marriage. She had overwritten it. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I felt a kind of vacancy. Like someone had scooped out everything soft inside me and left only the shell behind. I walked to the edge of the dock that night and sat there until my jeans were damp with dew. I didn't think about jumping. Nothing that dramatic. I just wanted the quiet to press itself into my skin until it replaced the chaos. At some point, I whispered, "Why?" Not loudly. Just a whisper to no one. No answer came. There's no closure when someone leaves without saying goodbye. There's no script for this kind of silence. Only the realization that what once felt permanent can dissolve without warning and you don't get a say. So I kept writing. Not for her. Not for healing. Just to document the unraveling. Because I needed proof that it wasn't all imagined. That love existed once. That I didn't invent the warmth. That I wasn't delusional. Page after page. The day she stopped reaching for my hand. The time I asked if she was okay and she just smiled like it was a stupid question. The tie. The way she laughed when she lied. By the end of the week, I had filled the entire notebook. That night, I placed it in the drawer next to the bed she used to sleep in. I didn't lock it. I didn't hide it. I just left it there like an artifact from a life that no longer existed. And then I sat on the porch with her mug in my hand, filled with coffee I no longer tasted. The wind moved through the trees like a sigh. And I began to let go. I didn't expect her to reach out. Not right away. But 3 days after I disappeared to the lake, the messages started. The first came around noon. Just a photo, a bowl of pasta she'd made 100 times before. The caption said, "Made your favorite tonight. Still tastes like you." I stared at it for a long time, not sure if it was supposed to be sweet or manipulative. It felt like she was reaching for something that used to work. I didn't respond. The next day, a photo of a crayon drawing our niece's artwork. A smiling stick figure in front of a house labeled Uncle and Auntie. The kind of thing that used to make us laugh or hang on the fridge for a week before it got tucked away. She asked if you'd be at dinner Sunday. I didn't know what to say. Still, I didn't reply. The messages kept coming, slowly at first. A line from an old song we both liked. A picture of the lake from our last summer trip. A quote she had once taped to the bathroom mirror, "Love isn't found. It's built." I read them all. But I didn't answer. I couldn't. They didn't sound like remorse. They sounded like nostalgia dressed up as apology. Eventually, her tone changed. The messages got longer. Less curated. More raw. "I know I broke something in you. I see it in my sleep. I keep thinking if I could just explain, maybe you'd understand. Maybe you'd hate me less. I didn't mean to fall out of love with you. I just didn't know how to stay." I sat on the porch with her mug in my hand as I read that one. The wind was colder that day. The lake had started to freeze near the edge. Everything felt still. And still, I said nothing. I didn't want her to think silence meant forgiveness. I didn't want to give her the illusion of hope. Because what I felt wasn't rage or grief or longing. It was absence. That was the worst part. Not the betrayal. Not the lies. The emptiness. She had burned the house down and I couldn't even find the energy to walk through the ashes. I didn't dream about her crying or apologizing or coming back. I didn't dream about her at all. One night I got a voice message. Her voice was shaky, quieter than I remembered. Not the confident tone she used when she lied. Not the gentle voice I used to fall asleep beside. Just a whisper. "Please don't disappear. You don't have to forgive me. I know I don't deserve that. But please don't vanish from everything." That was the first time I nearly replied. My thumb hovered over the record button. But what was I going to say? "I'm not disappearing. I just don't recognize what we were anymore." That wasn't fair. And it wasn't enough. Because the truth was simpler. I had nothing left to give her. The parts of me that once reached for her were gone. Not out of vengeance, but erosion. Like wind carving away stone. I stayed another week at the lake. I stopped writing. There was nothing else to say. Some days I sat in the living room surrounded by her old paperbacks, the ones she never finished. I flipped through them, looking for the things she underlined. Half of them were about hope. Half about longing. None of them offered answers. Once, I found a pressed flower between the pages of a book she read that first summer, The Bell Jar, I think. The flower had turned brittle beige. I touched it and it crumbled in my palm. I didn't clean it up. Just watched the dust settle. Back in the city, she must have realized I wasn't coming back. The messages slowed, then stopped. No more recipes. No more drawings. No more quotes from books she never finished. But it wasn't closure. It was inertia. And somehow that was worse. I wanted her to scream. To demand answers. To try harder. But all she sent a week after her last message was one line. "You were right. I was too late." That one stayed with me. Because it wasn't angry. It was true. I walked down to the water that night. The lake was still. Thin layers of ice cracking under the weight of time. I tossed a stone and watched the ripples stretch out like veins under glass. And for the first time in weeks, I let myself cry. Not for her. Not even for us. But for the version of me that once believed love was enough. Life at the lake eventually found its rhythm. Mornings were quiet. I ran along the trail by the water, alone with my breath and the crunch of frost beneath my shoes. Breakfast was simple: black coffee, eggs on toast. The news played in the background, but I rarely listened. My days blurred together in a gentle, manageable fog. For the first time in years, no one needed me to perform. No smiles on cue. No pretending things were fine. The stillness wasn't just in the air. It seeped into me. There were no confrontations, no questions, no games. I didn't have to guess what silence meant. Here, silence was honest. Occasionally, tears would surprise me, not from pain but from release. like my body had finally gotten permission to let go. I didn't cry for her, not really. I cried for the version of myself who tried so hard to hold things together, even as they crumbled in his hands. One afternoon, I walked into the storage closet and pulled out the tie, the same one I had found in her bag. It no longer held the weight it once did. It was just fabric. Expensive. Pointless. But it had been the first crack. The first clue. The moment my body knew what my heart refused to admit. I boxed it up, wrapped it in paper, and mailed it to our old address with no note. Let her decide what it meant. It wasn't closure, but it was an ending. A soft, almost silent one. 3 weeks after I left, I returned to the city. Not to reconcile. Not to forgive. Just to see what remained. I parked 2 blocks away. Walked the last bit like a stranger in my own life. The house looked the same but colder. The porch light was off. Her car was parked slightly crooked in the driveway, like she had rushed home from somewhere she wasn't proud to be. When she opened the door, she didn't speak, just stepped aside and let me in. We sat outside on the terrace. The sun was dipping below the rooftops, painting everything in tired orange. I touched her hand, not to hold it, just to feel if anything real still lived between us. It didn't move. She didn't pull away, but she didn't lean in either. There were no apologies, no explanations, no dramatic speeches. We just sat. 2 people staring at what used to be theirs, unsure if they were mourning or just watching it fade. Sometimes silence says more than any confession. There were no promises that day. Only presence. Only wreckage. Only stillness.